as a project coach have done, that's not going to happen because these kids love the 3 leaders they have, and they treat them like family, and they are always saying, I would never, if Dawn ever asked me to do something, I would definitely do it right away, and I would never say no. And I think teachers need to spend more time establishing a relationship and a rapport. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to know everything about the kid, but you have to make them aware that you care about their success. So if you see a student failing a test or lagging behind, you just talk to them after class and say, look, I know that you're not getting as good grades as you normally do. Is there something going on? And just letting them know that you as a teacher are not so separate from them, and letting them know that you care about their success. And I do understand that there's only so much time in the day and the teachers need to prepare and do that, but it only takes 2 seconds to go over to a kid and say, if you want to talk, I'm here after school.
So you think it's mainly a teacher problem and not a curricular or structural, or you think that it's just teachers are not sensitive enough to the individual needs of kids?
No, because, I mean, again, if you are a teacher and you're in a public school especially, you have to teach them this by this time, and if you don't, they're not going to do well on the test, and then that's going to look badly in our school, and then we're going to fire you. So it's definitely a institutional problem, and the way that our days are structured, I think the school day should be longer, so the teachers have that extra time to see if the work they're assigning is going over well with the student. I think that teachers need to have weekly, or maybe not weekly, maybe bi-weekly meetings where they come together and talk. Are you seeing the student is being disruptive in your class? What do we think we can work on together? And I think that the teachers should be mandated to be doing research and keeping up with what psychological methods are coming up with and what they're saying about the development and the adolescent brain. I think the entirety of teaching also needs to be changed in the fact that no one respects it. And so they're not supported as well as they should be, which is terrible. But if they're not getting paid enough and they're not getting enough hours, they're not getting enough support, then they're going to come to school and they're going to be just as disengaged as the students are. And also, like you mentioned, there's going to be work they're not going to want to do, but I also think that if it's cushioned in work that's interesting to them, then they understand that if they get through this, then they'll get to something fun or something that they have chosen. In response to your question, Susan, another thing that a student said to me is that he would love to have a list of books to read and he would get to choose which one, because he doesn't relate to Anne Frank, but he relates to the Starry Night or Number of the Stars. And so I think there has to also be more choice. And that, again, goes back to the curriculum set by the state and the district. And I think that teachers need to have more autonomy. But all these things are huge, and I don't know how they can happen, but I'm going to have to start from somewhere. So charter schools are a nice step, I think.
Yeah, I was just following up on the same point that Rosetta is making. In terms of comparing the two spaces, especially with regard to resources. I don't know how many project coach students, high schools there are, shared among 3 professors and a couple of graduate students and all that, and they also get paid. There's enough incentive for them to do whatever it is. And I'm thinking, if it's possible to think about the same presence of resources transferring to the high school, I don't know the kind of classrooms you visited, how many teachers there were for how many kids in the classroom, what kind of resources were available, and whether that might also, in addition to the teacher factor that you raised, whether the broader question of resources could also play a part in some of this lack of motivation that you're talking about, and
and
lack of relationships.
Yeah, also, you mentioned that there's, after-school programs in schools are so separate, and I think that's a problem. If they came together, they could combine their resources and also have conversations, and so Sam could say to a teacher of Alex, okay, I know this kid really cares and he wants to become a policeman, so maybe you could do this for him and help him out in this way. And I think that so I think that the 2 separate spheres really need to come together because there are such a lack of resources and a lack of time and energy that if you could get the conversation flowing and share the resources, then it would also benefit the after-school programs, not just the schools.
I just to make a comment, I don't know if it's a question, but it seems like a lot of the time we start with the resources instead of what we want for outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like what you're talking about is part of sort of creating an environment and a framework of what we want to move towards. And we shouldn't be starting with what the deficits are and the income. It seems that we start with what we want, and we frame the activities that are going to get us to the outcomes, and then in a linear way at least, we could talk about what resources we need.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think this gets into policy and it gets into politics, and
Yeah.
I think it's very limiting to think that we can't do this or we can't do that
Right.
because of the resources we have. I mean, we have lots of resources in this country, and we're expending them on things that most of the population probably doesn't even want.
Right.
And, I think there's a lot of discussion about how do you invest in the future, and by, education, I think everybody would agree, but yet we're expending our resources on Afghanistan. But I think we have to first have, I think what you're giving us, and that is sort of a vision of what's going to engage the kinds of populations that are failing, to acquire the education that's going to make them competitive, in the future.
Right.
So I think I think Lucy's question is an interesting one. Well, if it takes, a ratio of staff to kids to engage these kids, then that's what we need to do, and we have to,
Right.
from a political and policy point of view, go out and, make the case. So.
Right, and the priority has to lie with the kids, not with everything else that it lies with, like numbers and test scores and salaries.
If we keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we keep getting the same results,
Right.
I mean, that's sort of a view of insanity.
Right.
Did it doesn't show up in the thesis at all, and it's sort of maybe difficult to talk about, but there is a culture of disengagement that you were working with, and I'd just be interesting to hear you think about that. I mean, because I know it was counter to your experience in high school and your experience at Smith. That there's commitment, there's perseverance, there's tenacity, around academics, and I know you didn't find that. And just what was your thought process as you experienced that?
It was actually extremely frustrating. I would ask them, why aren't you doing your homework? Why aren't you studying for this? And they would just say, I don't want to. And as a high school student, I could never have not done a homework assignment, or I could never have skipped a class. I just would have died. So, and even when I was following them, Alex, one day, when I followed him, was like, we're going to skip this class and go meet George in the hallway. And I was, no, we can't do that. We have to go to class. So it was really difficult for me, especially because it's like two different worlds. It's like the after-school world and the school world. It's so separate, and I struggled with it a lot in thinking about why it is that these kids are so burned out. And I think it starts in elementary school for them. And one student who wasn't in my study, I would ask them all the time, why do you think my life is so different, and my life in school is so different than your life in school? Why, as a teenager, was I so driven, and was I so college-bound, and why aren't you? And one of the students said to me that when he was in third grade, he got his first F, and he was really scared to bring home to his mom. But then he realized that his mom wasn't going to be home. So he realized it doesn't matter. No one's going to do anything about it. So then he said, I didn't care. And from that point on, I realized it doesn't matter if I get an F, nothing's going to happen. And that kind of answer really hurts to hear, because you look at this kid that's telling you this and you see so much potential and so much more room for growth, but when you don't have a starting point to go from, it's kind of like walking uphill, and how long can one human being walk uphill for so long? And then, so I think it's definitely a home thing as well as support. And, they have your support and my support, but that only goes so far. You can't be a parent. And
And that seems like it should be in the thesis. I didn't read the thesis.